This is what I call the Ashton Kutcher problem. Did you know that Ashton Kutcher most likely married Demi Moore out of spite because he was mad at Bruce Willis? Now, how did that happen? Well, Bruce Willis was on a film with January Jones, and he was hitting on January, trying to get her set up on a date with him. And January shot him down because she was in a relationship with Ashton Kutcher at the time. Ashton Kutcher found out, of course, because January goes to her boyfriend and says, the guy I'm working with is hitting on me. Ashton loses his mind about this, gets very jealous and upset. He eventually says something to January Jones to the tune of, you're not even a good actor, so why are you pursuing acting? And she dumps his ass. And then he is so upset about the whole situation and Bruce Willis, and then he ends up marrying Demi Moore not long after this relationship ended. So then he has this tumultuous relationship with Demi Moore. She writes about it in her book. She says she felt like she was being abused. She was trying to get sober, and he kept saying that alcoholism basically wasn't real. And he's doing all of this while they're like exploring their relationship in different ways. And she said, I think at one point she says in her book that she felt like she was being tortured by Ashton. So they get a divorce, right? And then he ends up getting together with his co-star from That 70s Show, Mila Kunis, who he met when she was a teenager. So that relationship already is raising some eyebrows because people dug up some interviews from That 70s Show promo where he's saying some very weird stuff. Cut to today, where we know that Demi Moore had a huge comeback with The Substance. It was a hit. Now, Ashton is coming out with basically a Substance ripoff called The Beauty that's going to be on FX. And then he's saying, oh, we're so proud of Demi. Like, kind of diminishing all of the famous success she has found with The Substance recently. But I digress. I also had to put it on the board that Dax Shepard basically has a career because of Ashton Kutcher. So he's to blame for that too. And it seems like even though Ashton was highly coveted as the hot it boy in the 90s and early 2000s, now that we look at his dating record, it seems like he has brought down every woman that he has been with while we've known him like in popular media, right? And on top of that, he started Thorn, which was supposed to be this great company that was helping to identify people being lost in certain types of material, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you started this initiative and you think that it's so important, then why are you connected to so many RICO cases? Like Danny Masterson and Scientology, Diddy, and that Abercrombie and Fitch RICO case. I mean, unless you're the whistleblower, which it doesn't seem that you are, what's going on with that? So overall, I think that Ashton Kutcher's career has been a net negative for pretty much everybody. I'm going to add a couple of names here. We're going to start with Brittany Murphy. Now, Brittany Murphy and Ashton Kutcher dated in 2002 into the early part of 2003. I believe they broke up in like January 2003. She went on to get married and have a whole life in that couple of years after they dated. And she ended up passing away in 2009 in Britney Spears' home, of all places, of pneumonia. And I believe her autopsy said there was a drug toxicity as well. So Brittany Murphy's connection to Ashton Kutcher is questionable to the audience at large because Ashton Kutcher and Brittany Murphy have a lot of pictures of them with Diddy, who Ashton Kutcher obviously had a close relationship with. And Diddy also has a fair amount of people around him who were very healthy who passed away because of pneumonia. So of course that brings into question if Ashton Kutcher was somehow involved in the passing of Brittany Murphy. But even though they remained friendly after breaking up, Brittany Murphy doesn't seemingly have anything on Ashton Kutcher. Who knows though, right? We have no idea. So why would Ashton Kutcher have any motivation to take Brittany Murphy's life later on when she's married and living in this house with her mom and her husband, who also were very questionable and weird? They would all like sleep in the bed together, but I digress. And then Britney Spears sold Brittany Murphy that house because she said there was just like a weird vibe there. I think she said it was like haunted. So there's a lot of suspicion around Brittany Murphy's passing that cannot necessarily be tied to Ashton Kutcher. But a lot of people tend to just have some questions because of the close proximity of Diddy and everything we know about Diddy now. And then another name we're going to add to the board is Ashley Ellerin, who dated Ashton Kutcher in 2001. And I mean, I say dated very loosely because Ashley met Ashton at a birthday party. And then later he asked her to go out on a date. He showed up to that first date allegedly very late at like 10:45 at night. So he shows up, looks through the window, knocks on the door, nobody answers, and he sees what he thinks on the carpet is red wine. He said he met her at a party. He thought people were just partying. Someone spilled red wine, so he turned around and left. That was his testimony. Later on, they caught the person who took her life, who was a serial killer in California, Michael Gargiulo. And Ashton Kutcher testified in that trial that that's what he saw. But later, during the Danny Masterson trial, one of Danny Masterson's ex-girlfriends / one of his victims came forward and said that there was a phone call the night that Ashley Ellerin passed away between Ashton Kutcher and Danny Masterson. Basically, like a fixer situation, asking, what should I do? Is this going to be bad for my image? I'm just going to leave. So in moments after Ashley passed away, the question becomes, could he have saved her life if he had called 911? Because he clearly knew that wasn't wine on the carpet, because he called Danny Masterson to say something bad happened, basically, and was trying to get someone to help him figure out the PR spin on the situation. Allegedly, according to some hearsay, he and Danny Masterson decided it would be best if he left the scene of the crime and said it was just wine. So that's what he did, which is very suspicious. So again, we're adding to the Ashton Kutcher board, and we are left with, it is a net negative for society and Hollywood at large. His career, but when you look at his dating record, Ashley Ellerin, 2001, passed away. Then he moved on to date Brittany Murphy, who later passed away. Then he went on to date January Jones, who he got angry with because she was in a movie with Bruce Willis, and allegedly Bruce Willis hit on her, tried to set them up on a date, like unknowingly. Then January Jones went to Ash and told him. Then he said, "You're not even a good actress. You should leave Hollywood." So she left him instead. And then she went on to have a child where no one knows the baby daddy. She is sisters doing it all for themselves, basically. And then he went on to marry Demi Moore, where she describes a relationship that sounds not far off from some of the testimonies we got in the Diddy trial from his exes, if we're being honest. And now he's with Mila Kunis, who he met when she was a teenager, who he made stand up for Danny Masterson, possibly jeopardizing her entire career as well. So yeah, net negative, plus the whole Dax Shepard thing. It's bad. And that's the Ashton Kutcher problem. Mike Jeffries, formerly of Abercrombie and Fitch, has gotten himself into some hot water. He just acquired some charges related to being stuck in some traffic, if you know what I mean. Basically, his charges say that he was flying young male models all over the world to have casting couch situations for not only him and his partner, but also for their friends, colleagues, and other people who were in the industry in exchange for sometimes money. And he was doing this under the guise of working for Abercrombie and Fitch as a model scout. Mind you, this was the peak time of Abercrombie and Fitch. So if these models had been cast, their photos of their torso basically would be on every bag across every mall in not only America, but across the globe. So this was a huge opportunity, but this isn't even the first time that the parent company of Abercrombie and Fitch has gotten in trouble for this very thing, because Abercrombie and Fitch is owned by L Brands, and L Brands was started by Les Wexner. And for a period of time, a long period of time, Les Wexner was the billionaire funding this guy. And for a while, this guy was power of attorney for Les Wexner. Now, Les Wexner owned L Brands, which also was the parent company of Victoria's Secret, Pink, and all of these stores, the Limited and Limited 2, mind you, the Limited 2, a store for teens, has just come back. Express, Bath & Body Works, Lane Bryant, Structure, which was a men's store, Henry Bendel, which was an accessory store, La Senza, which was from Canada, and Galen's, which was sold to Dick's Sporting Goods. Now, along with all of these stores, which is basically every store in the mall, Les Wexner also owned a town called New Albany, Ohio. Yes, the whole town. And who helped him while he was building that town? You guessed it, that guy. So this guy was using his power and connection to Les Wexner, and he was saying that he was a model scout for Victoria's Secret, and he was approaching young women and saying he could give them an opportunity working as a model for Victoria's Secret, possibly being in the Victoria's Secret fashion show. So he was using this as a ruse to assault young women. He would also offer young women on college campuses opportunities, like the opportunity to go stay on a billionaire's estate while they just paint and do their art or whatever. And then I'll pay for your classes, basically. So the place that he was sending some of these young women was an estate in New Albany owned by Les Wexner. So picture, if you will, you're a young woman, maybe 17, 18, 19, around that age. This billionaire is sending you off to an estate to go paint, and you go to the estate. It's huge. And even getting to the gate on foot is kind of a feat, right? And even if you get to the gate and get to that security that's owned by this guy, who the power of attorney over this guy and the entire town at some times was this guy, you get through that gate and all the police are owned by Les Wexner and your captor. It sounds like a horror movie. But Les Wexner was also very charitable. He owned the Wexner Israel Fellowship Program and the Wexner Foundation. Now, the Wexner Foundation sends a lot of money to the Birthright Israel trips. So a lot of the funding for those trips comes from the Wexner Foundation. But also this program, the Wexner Israel Fellowship Program, was sending young soldiers and people who were like police and things like that from Israel to Harvard so that they could learn about the world. And it was a free program funded by the Wexner Israel Fellowship Program. But there was a time that Les Wexner was fighting with this guy because this guy was mad because the soldiers would go here to Harvard and they were getting taught by liberals. So they were becoming too liberal and they wouldn't go back to fight for him. And they got into a little press war about it, but they've made up since. But if you could make it through Harvard and not get brainwashed by the liberals, then you were welcome with open arms into the Israeli government, because most of them became government officials if and when they returned. So yeah, that's what's going on at L Brands. And I think it's interesting that Les Wexner, who was in charge of these brands. Oh, I forgot to even mention Ed Kazia, because he's also a scumbag who did some stuff with Victoria's Secret. And one of the reasons that the Victoria's Secret fashion show ended was because of this guy, this guy, this guy, and some other stuff. It wasn't because they weren't inclusive enough. It was because of all the stuff happening behind the scenes with the women that they were telling to starve and look like kids, basically. It's weird.
Okay, so here's my conspiracy theory about Ashton Kutcher, since no one really asked. So back in 2009, Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore made this initiative called Thorn. And Thorn's basically a technology company because they made a facial recognition program that can scour the internet to look through videos of a certain nature to find children that might have been missing or being trafficked. And the goal is basically to find these children and help save them or rescue them from these situations where they're being exploited, right? And Ashton has testified in front of Congress that this technology, this facial recognition program, along with law enforcement, is helping to find and rescue these children. I also kind of think it's interesting that you never really see Demi Moore's name associated with Thorn. It's always Ashton Kutcher. And there have been a lot of articles about Thorn. There's also this viral tweet that makes people think that Thorn has done a little bit more work than they have, actually. There have been around 5,700 people who have been identified with this technology, but only 130 people have actually been rescued using this technology, which is still a great number. 130 people that wouldn't have been rescued without it is great, but it's not close to 6,000 people who've been rescued. So let's just get that number right. But there's a lot of numbers that don't make sense when you're talking about Thorn, but I'll have to get into their financials later. This kind of article and viral tweet combination are a way to give Ashton Kutcher and Thorn a little bit more credit than they probably deserve, because now when you Google Ashton Kutcher, trafficking, abuse, anything that's related to that, Thorn is what comes up, not anything else. And I'm not saying that Ashton Kutcher has done anything, but I am saying that he surrounded himself for a long time with a bunch of people who are very questionable. Like, if he's so worried about trafficking, he could have looked a little closer to home, because he's got Danny Masterson by his side, who is facing 3 decades in prison because he was drugging and assaulting women. And then you have Wilmer Valderrama, who was openly dating multiple teenagers, like over and over and over again. And Ashton can't really say he didn't notice his friend coming to set with multiple teenagers that was actually getting spots on their TV show. Like, how do you ignore that this man was a grown man dating teenagers, like one after the other? I mean, Ashton had to notice that he couldn't go out for dinner and drinks with Wilmer and a date because they were all underage. And then Ashton starts his show Punked, where he punks or pranks multiple celebrities. And let me tell you, the episode where Jonah Hill and Justin Long buy drinks for underage girls does not hold up. And Ashton says there are some episodes that didn't air at all because he destroyed them because he was intimidated by the people he was pranking in those videos. Now, wouldn't it be pretty easy to blackmail someone if you had them on video breaking the law or presuming that they were breaking the law and you were the person who had control over those videos being destroyed or being seen by the entire world? I don't know. Now, when you lay all that out, doesn't it just make sense that Ashton Kutcher would associate himself with a company like Thorn, where he could change the SEO on what comes up when you look up his name and abuse or underage girls? Now, I'm not saying that I know of anything that Ashton Kutcher has done. I don't have evidence that he's done anything or any proof of anything. I'm just saying that I can't be the only person who has thought about this conspiracy theory. Right? I'm not.